Hey everybody, Chris Armiger for Mayor's Beach Fire. I'm doing my case study on the back from chapter 10 for this module. It's a subway attack by the cult in Tokyo 95, if I said that right. So there was a couple things about this case study that I liked, that intrigued me. Why I picked it was because it's nothing that's really familiar with me. I've never been to a big city in terms of like having to use subway and mass transportation and stuff like that. But I've always recognized, and just from taking classes in the past, like going up to Anniston in Alabama for those hot classes and stuff like that, that places that have a dense, are very populated in a dense amount of space, are terrific targets, especially for case study, or rather for terrorist events that have to do with like biological agents, especially airborne agents. So, that's why this one caught my eye. And then really, I wasn't really sure which one I was going to do until I started researching it. And I watched a couple videos on YouTube, and especially ones from The Guardian. They do a really good job with their stuff about this. So the history of this one intrigued me, more so even than the case study itself. So that's why I chose to do this one. So walk through the case study. Stage one is, so this is from the perspective of you're the director of public safety and transit, or in the transit authority for a large metropolitan city in Japan. And the gist of it is, so you have the subway system, and in this particular station that is mentioned throughout the case study, it handles a capacity of about 5 million people a day pass through this particular subway hub. One of the considerations that you have as director of public safety for this transit authority is, first of all, you have the consideration of the volume, or the population of people using it, but also that the town where this particular station is prone to earthquakes. So you have a big task ahead of you when dealing with, emergency management, especially mitigation. So knowing that you have the issue with earthquakes, not knowing that you're going to have a terrorist event anytime soon, but knowing that you have to deal with the earthquake thing, it starts out with, what is your plan to prevent and reduce casualties within the system? One of the things it talks about is having plans, disaster plans, and specifically evacuation plans, because it's a subway station and it's prone to earthquakes. If there's an event, you need to get people out as quickly as can. So for the people that work underneath you in the transit authority, the operators of the subways, the people that work in the stations themselves, your responding jurisdictions for as far as first response, fire, police, EMS, people who service, who work the service, public works part of that, who are responsible for the engineering and maintenance of the facility. They all need to be very, very, very familiar with the evacuation plans and how to operate them and make them work the most efficiently. Another thing it talks about is, so it says, what's your plan comprised of for protection of the subway infrastructure? And it talks about using security cameras, any sort of technology for early warnings. We have fire prevention systems, fire protection systems, so smoke alarms. Also, because you're underground, you're going to have CO2 alarms, CO alarms, those sort of things. And then it says to consider, because you're dealing with the earthquake stuff, early warning stuff for the earthquakes to initiate evacuation. So like seismographs, stuff that would read it. When we talked about, I think, earthquakes in previous chapters, and the technology exists for those sort of things, early detection devices. And then post this incident, you would also want to incorporate anything that can detect any biological threats, anthrax, ricin. This case talks about sarin gas. You go to stage 2, it's March 20th. between 7 8 o'clock in the morning. Your security forces and patrol, they've noticed that there's some suspicious individuals that are lurking around a particular hub, and they're carrying knapsacks, and their behavior just doesn't match the behavior of everyone else in the station. They're lingering. They're not very purposeful with why they're there. This is a very busy station, a very busy hub. Like I said, it sees 5 million people a day, so people are moving. They got a place to go, and these guys are kind of lingering around and just looking a little suspicious. What's your communication plan? So this has been brought to your attention. Your communication plan should be to have any law enforcement or security forces make contact with the suspicious individuals and just kind of see what they're up to. Hey, start off soft and then hit them heavy if you have to. But hey, are you lost? You look lost. What can we do to get you where you need to go? Hey, I see you got the bag. What's the bag for? Blah, blah, blah. Just however they would operate. But you've identified that there's suspicious activity, and you need to follow up on it. And you need to follow up on it sooner than later, because it's a risk. And in any risk assessment, because you have the density and the population that's traveling through that hub, it's a priority. So it says, what resources do you need to mobilize your plan? So if you have, it takes it from the perspective that you have approached these individuals prior to the disaster and you've identified that they were a threat before something happened. What would you do? So you would contact local first responders. You'd contact hazmat, bomb squad, stuff like that, get additional security. But as it turns out, that didn't happen. They didn't find them early, so everything was reactive to an incident. Stage 3 goes on to they're in the subway, they drop these knapsacks, and then they puncture the bags. Once they puncture the bags, they hurry up and they take off out of the subway car. So, what do you do? What's your action plan? It's to immediately start evacuating the cars and get as many people out of there as you can. But something that's not mentioned in this case study that I think is very important is before you even initiate your evacuation, because you're obviously suspicious of something, you need to quarantine the evacuation zones. And I would hope that that's part of the evacuation plan. If it's not, it needs to be. Not so much for the natural events, like if there was an earthquake, if people got to go, they got to go, and you don't necessarily need to worry about quarantining them. But in the event that you suspect that there's a terrorist act, that there's some sort of biological agent used, or even if there was like an active shooter or something like that, you really want to quarantine as part of your evacuation plan, mostly just for medical surveillance, for medical need, so you don't have people taken off. In the event of biological attacks, you don't want to create more patients, make the scene bigger by affecting other people. They might flee to the hospital, they might flee to their apartments before they have symptoms, and then now they're contaminating, other geographical locations within the city, and they could be miles away. You never know by the time you figure it out and you get to them, because now you're going to have to find all these people. So the only thing I would disagree with this case study, or that I noticed that stood out to me that wasn't in it, was the lack of mentioning of quarantine. They discussed evacuation several times and the need for it, and it's absolutely appropriate. It says in stage 4, it goes on to say that at this point the gas has been released and the cart's flooding with gas. People are panicking and they're fleeing, and then the station's starting to empty out to the street. But the need to quarantine, again, to reiterate my point, is imperative so that you can limit the contact and the spread of what it is, because you really don't know what it is. It goes on to stage 5 of the incident. Now there's 12 dead, there's 5,500 people have been injured. What do you need to do now? And it's only at this point that law enforcement and military arrive, and they identify what it is, the hazard, and they identify it as sarin, so now you can treat it appropriately. How strict you need to be with quarantines and stuff like that. I like in this one, it does a very good job of saying that they contacted hospitals so that they could start preparing for the appropriate treatment, get their bed counts right. They can estimate how long people, because it's sarin gas, they can identify the protocol and then estimate, the time and the need for resources in the hospital facilities to treat it appropriately. Issues that came from this, and what stood out the most to me, is it identified vulnerabilities in these mass transit systems, and that they're soft targets. They have very low security, and they have a very good, I don't know what the term is, rate of return for an investment in terms of inflicting the most damage to the most amount of people in a short amount of time, especially if they had chosen another biologic where these people could have rode the subway, and moved throughout the whole city of Japan and spread it from bus stop to bus stop, or from subway stop to stop to their local communities and towns, outside the major city. So I included a video. It's a couple minutes long, about 15 minutes long. If you're interested in this case study, it does a very good job of illustrating the history of it. The cult is very interesting. It's a political cult. It's illustrated and portrayed, especially in the textbook, because they don't go into the history a lot, as a religious cult. But it was very much a political cult, and they had done a lot of business with Russia to get weaponized. They had moved some of their one of their compounds. They had gone to Australia to start practicing with the sarin gas. So there were several opportunities for this threat to be identified before it ever happened, and it just got picked up on. It didn't get picked up on the radar because they had become so international. They were moving from Japan to Russia to Australia, all before they decided to go through with the attack. So there were a lot of opportunities to catch them, but they were all missed. And I suspect it was just because they were so spread out geographically throughout the world that the different law enforcement agencies didn't communicate appropriately within a reasonable timeline that they could kind of match things up and identify threats. So that's it for this one, and I'll watch a couple of your guys, and I hope you enjoy it, and have a good Thanksgiving if I don't hear from you before. So long.